Incarceration. It's an uncomfortable word for most people that usually stirs up all kinds of negative emotions and feelings. Incarceration is when somebody is sent to jail or prison after being accused or found guilty of a crime. When you think about someone who has spent time in jail or prison, what are your very first thoughts? Take a few seconds. Let me guess. You probably thought about words like bad, dangerous, shady, or unsafe. You may think you know about the people who have served time, but in this episode, we're seeking out ways to understand just a little bit better. Why? Because 1 in 3 adults have experienced incarceration. And today, we're talking with someone who fits in that statistic. You ready? Here we go.
My name is Justin Lindsey. I'm an urban missionary community coordinator implementing care and love on the west side of Atlanta and in neighborhoods and just building up community the best way I could based off of what I've come from. I used to be known as a third-time convicted felon, a person who was always just in trouble, a person just full of anger, full of hate, and an ID number that the state of Georgia has given me years ago.
When you were growing up, did you know anyone who was incarcerated?
Yes, I knew plenty of people. I knew my mom, I knew my father, I knew uncle, and just a lot of like older friends. Do I think it played a role in my story? By them being incarcerated, I think it played a huge role. I think it affected me more than I realized. I think the first time I witnessed my mom being incarcerated, I was 6 years old, and obviously it was a scary thing. But like my grandma and people were trying to walk us through it, so we're just like waiting for her to come back home. She comes back home. As I grew older, obviously I learned about what that means, what it looks like. And I was like, man, that would never happen to me. And then by the time I hit middle school, it literally started happening to me. When it came back to me, by the time I was my junior year, that I couldn't play sports in the middle of basketball season because I didn't have enough credits that was to have at that time. They ended up telling me I couldn't play sports no more. And so my mind didn't think about the solution for it or how to fix it. I just shut down and returned back to how I was when I was younger. But this time I was deeper into it than I was before. And I ended up hanging around people that were doing crazy things like selling drugs, being involved in a lot of street activities. When I was 17 years old, it led me to a night that I could never forget when I was out with some guys and things happened and we ended up getting pulled over, and next thing you know, we're surrounded by all these police. 3 of us ended up being on the news the next day, and we ended up catching this armed robbery, 2 aggravated assaults, and 2 aggravated battery charges. And at that point, I didn't know what to think because this was different. This wasn't no longer juvenile where you're in there for a few days or a few weeks and then all of a sudden you go to court and get out. This was big boy jail. And here I am at 17 years old, and then hearing the consequences of this is that I'd be facing 25 years incarcerated in prison, locked up. I had no idea what to do at that point. I was just stuck in a place that I promised myself that I would never be. Like I wanted to be somebody known in the streets because of the money that I seen people make and the popularity that I seen people have and the status that people were carrying. I chased that because there's a void that I kept trying to fill that I never really had, and that was really to just be loved just for who I am. In my household, we didn't experience that type of love amongst each other. It was just, we knew that we loved each other, but it was never told or it was never talked about, or you just didn't ever really feel it. Just being broken like that put me in this position. It doesn't mean that I was a terrible person. It just meant that I just was making these terrible choices, and in doing so, it made people look at me differently.
Think of all the adults in your life that are close to you. Your grandparents, parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, older siblings, your neighbors, your coaches, your friends' parents. If we refer back to the statistic, that means 1 in every 3 of your adults have experienced incarceration. But just because someone has been to jail or prison It doesn't mean that they are a bad person. By believing that people are not bad, just broken, we can approach tough situations with gentleness and hope for healing.
What do you wish people knew about the people who are incarcerated?
That their circumstances and even their decision makings doesn't determine who they truly are or who they can even be.
We often look at a person and make our mind up about who they are based off of what we can see right now. But we have to remember, so many of the things that happened in their life, to them or around them, which they maybe had no control over, led to the moment that we can see right now. Maybe in response to really tough circumstances, they reacted in anger, rebellion, or desperation and made decisions that ultimately led to arrest. Maybe they just made a few dumb choices. It's important to remember that everyone deserves the opportunity to flourish and thrive, to heal and grow from their experiences. This is what it means to be human. Unfortunately, people who are incarcerated are often treated as less than human.
So, what about prison? Do you have any stories of feeling dehumanized while you're in prison?
So prison is a different world. Man, you're taking me back. It's a difference between county jail and prison. County jail is like you're either going to prison or you're getting ready to go home. In prison, you're there. So, and officers will treat you in prison however they feel, whatever mood they're in, because they know you have a hope to want to get in parole.
Here, Justin mentions parole. Parole is when someone in prison is rewarded with a form of early release back into society. They are allowed to leave prison but must live up to a series of responsibilities while on parole. If that person does not follow the rules, they risk having to go back to prison.
So they hang something over your head. So to them, they're treating you like animals. They come in and yell whatever names they want to call you and just yell chow time. It's literally like you're in a cage and you're just like being yelled at to get ready to eat. They dehumanize you like crazy in prison just by the way they treat you. Like they talk to you any kind of way, and you, if you want to make it home or you want to have good behavior to meet parole, depending on your circumstance and situation, you just have to deal with it. I was talked to like crazy, and I just had to stay humble through it. I had to just soak it up and just listen to it, and honestly, I had to make myself pray for him. There was a time in the county jail, we get an hour out each day. So sometimes it's in the morning, sometimes it's in the evening. We came out one morning, we're playing cards, we're some using the phone, taking showers. Officer comes in with this attitude out of nowhere, screaming, yelling, and I'm just like, why is he like this early? Like nobody's done anything to him. And he bone rushes to my face, screaming at me, telling me to put my hands behind my back. I do so. It leads me to going into the hole. I'm thinking they're just going to put me in there for a little bit and let me back out. They come back and they ask me to turn around and face the bunks. And I'm thinking, okay, they're going to take the handcuffs off. And by the time I could look over my shoulder, there were 15 officers. And they literally were like beating me. And they left me in there for 3 days. That was the first time I ever felt less than human. I mean, I've dealt with a lot of crazy stuff by living the life that I lived, but then I felt like I was treated like a bad animal, like a pit bull who was dangerous to people, and they were just trying to tame me, and I wasn't even doing anything like aggressive. What that was happening to me was like, how do I let somebody else know, right? How do I get out of this? The first thought was, how do I retaliate?
Yeah,
because I'm like, man, they have to pay for this. Like, there's something has to be done to them because what they're doing to me. If this happened in the streets, there's consequences. But in this situation, you're overpowered. You're dealing with law enforcement, and you're already looked at as a no less person because the situation that I'm in, being locked up. So it was like a no-win situation. Like anything I can speak up against, it's me against them. My word versus their word. Or now I'm going to create more bad blood with them, and who knows how many times they'll do this to me.
We asked Justin how he thinks we as a community can help restore dignity and humanity for so many people who have been treated less than. Here's what he had to say.
Just by certain questions that could be asked, like if you ask somebody, who are you? How many times do people ask that, right? A lot of times when even young people, when they learn about people who's been locked up or incarcerated that ask, well, what did you do? Or why did you do it? And nobody truly asked the question, who are you? By asking somebody who you are, you give them an opportunity to share their identity to you and not what they've done.
Yeah.
It changes the whole game, because you'll make someone's heart smile by asking them who they are, because for one, it'll catch them off guard, and then it shows that you really want to know who they say they are instead of what other people say they are.
So you're humanizing them
Exactly.
to their face.
Yes.
And valuing their story at the same time.
Yes. You literally give them value of, they want to know who I am.
Mm.
Like they're curious about who I am.
Mm.
And I'm going to tell them. 9 times out of 10, you'll change a whole person's mindset by just asking them who they are.
Mm. Do you practice this?
Yes. I'm involved in a lot of ministry in the inner city of Atlanta. So we deal with people coming off from transitional centers. Every month we're in a transitional center with people, loving on them, and we always ask them, like, who are you? Who are you today? Who are you going to be tomorrow? And they get puzzled at first because they're not expecting someone to ask them that question, because they're so used to people just labeling them, or they're used to being called by just their ID number. Even people that are homeless, living on the streets. When you learn someone's name, when you call them by their name and you say, who are you? That gives so much emphasis on them, on value to them.
Maybe you can't think of a single person you know who has been to jail or prison. Let's think back to that statistic again. 1 in 3 adults. If you don't know someone who's been incarcerated, there's a pretty good chance many of your friends do. And if you're a good friend to the people in your life, you care about them. A good phrase for us to try and think about or remember is, it matters to me because of how it's affecting you.
But then you could also be thinking like, well, it has nothing to do with me. My family's good. We're good. We don't deal with stuff like that, or we're not like those type of people, or I don't know what any of that feels like, or I don't know anybody around me who's dealt with that. Your family may not have any closeness to what it's like to be incarcerated or experience any of these things, but I'm pretty sure somebody has dealt with it to some degree. But just by even caring enough to have an open door for somebody to lean on in those situations and those circumstances, you don't know how it can affect that person in a good way. By just offering care to somebody or listening to somebody who is dealing with completely different circumstances that you don't have or that you can't even relate to, just showing genuine care will go a long way in affecting that person who's dealing with stuff like that. And then just, I ask, what if it was you? What if you was in those type of shoes?
Okay, let's explore this idea just a little bit more. Let's say a friend of yours has a family member who is currently in jail or prison. What kinds of things might that friend be going through? We'll give you a beat to think on it. All right, let's check in. Did you consider how it may affect their family in the day-to-day? For example, the loss of an income. If your friend has 2 adults working and bringing in paychecks, and now they only have one, that means money might be really tight. Maybe someone has to pick up an extra shift. Maybe your friend now has to work little jobs or help watch younger siblings more. This can show up in little details that you might see, like they may have to miss more practices or quit a sport completely. They may be tired during the day and fall asleep in class, or they may not have the funds or freedom to hang out on the weekends. Did you consider how it may affect your friend's emotions, how they feel? If the person who is now incarcerated was a part of their everyday life, maybe they did the cooking or coached them in their favorite sport, or maybe that was their only person they trusted to talk about difficult things, and now that person is just gone? Imagine how hard it might be for your friend emotionally. Missing someone feels terrible.
You may know people that have family members and it affects them. They may start acting out or being a certain way because the person that they're close to they wish was home and is not. You may notice a change in their behavior or their decision making, but ultimately the root of it is because of what's affecting them based off of who they love and what they see happening in someone else's life close to them. And you may not even know how to relate, but you can always be there ready to support if they're ever willing to talk about it, or if you're ever willing to just give some type of just extra care or support towards them.
Did you consider how they may be too embarrassed or shy to talk about it? Remember, they love the person outside of the decision that they made, which led to incarceration. So it may feel too risky to talk to you or anyone else. They don't want you to think badly of them.
Imagine being young and you seeing your own mother in and out of jail, incarcerated. Obviously, you're not looking at your mom the way that they're trying to present her to be in a courtroom, because that's your mom. You know your mom. You know your mom loves you. You love your mom. She cares for you. She does all she can for you. But there's certain decisions that she might make that puts her in these circumstances. You never see her different. You just wish she would do different or be different. But I didn't look at her like she was this monster in the community or this terrible person. I just knew she was making bad choices. Sometimes we get caught up in the field of not really considering the why, and we just start labeling them like they're just not regular people. And by doing that, we literally dehumanize people.
Considering all these things we've talked about and all the things you've heard, what would you say is a good next step for our listeners?
To start to evaluate people around you and finding out like who is dealing with these type of situations, whether they have a family member incarcerated or a loved one incarcerated. Because if I think back at when I was in middle school, a lot of people didn't really know that I was watching my mother go in and out of jail since I was 6 years old. And I think that if people showed care towards it, then and try to engage themselves with, building like a closeness to myself back then, it would have encouraged me to surround myself around people that cared. Instead, I was surrounding myself around people that could relate. And the people that could relate were doing the things that caught me up doing what I was doing. So I think the next step is honestly like, who do I know that has dealt with or dealing with any type of incarceration, and how can I get close enough to them to show them that I care?
Okay, we have a few questions for you. You can think about these on your own or discuss with a group or someone you trust. Number 1, after listening to the discussion on incarceration, what are you noticing happening inside of you? What feelings are coming up? And why do you think you're feeling that way? Number 2, we heard Justin's answer already. Now we want to know, what do you think is a good next step for you? Number 3, using some of the things we've talked about, what's one way that you might be a good friend to the people in your life whose story includes incarceration? Number 4, take some time, even beyond this episode, to imagine what it might be like to be in someone else's shoes and consider,
how would you feel if it were you?
And that's a wrap for today's episode of It Could Be You. Justin's story reminds us that the challenges faced by others could easily be our own. Take what you heard here and share it with your friends, family, and classmates. Spark conversations, challenge the status quo, and let your passion be the fuel that drives you into your neighborhood. You can find outlines, worksheets, insight from experts, and other resources for discussing the topic of incarceration with the people around you at itcouldbeyoupod.com. Friend, fighter, villain, believer, survivor. It could be you.